everyone in Julius Baker's studio had a job before they turned 25. So I think I kind of just internalized that, and like now that's like my very arbitrary benchmark for my life.
My guest today is a flute performance student at Carnegie Mellon University studying with Alberto Almarza. He's performed as principal flute with the New York Philharmonic Youth Orchestra and the ISO Symphony Orchestra, won first prize in the Miklo International Competition, and appeared at the Orford Music Festival twice now, as well as the NSO Summer Music Institute. In high school, he studied with Mary Bartow and Jeffrey Kainer. We met about 2 years ago, I think, at the Consummate Flutist Summer Program at Carnegie Mellon, and quickly became friends. So, Will Garrity, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, hi, Karina. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about whatever. I imagine this conversation will go many different ways. But I will start by giving you a compliment. I think you're definitely one of the more ambitious and driven people that I know. Perhaps maybe a bit intense, but like in a good way. The kind of person where I'm very glad you're my friend, and I would be a little bit scared if you were my enemy. Do people say this to you about your ambition and your drive a lot?
Yeah. I mean, ambition is interesting because in my head, it's kind of just like, I think I'm very single-minded, where I think, especially when it comes to playing, I really know what I want to do, which is, have an orchestra job. And I'm going to kind of put that to the front whenever possible. I don't know. Yeah, I would definitely say as well is that I'm fairly, intense. And I don't know, I have a lot going on, in this head of mine that, I want to share with the world. So obviously I need to put in the work to make that happen. But yeah, I don't know, I'd say that's a fair assessment.
I'm glad you're not offended by my... It's a good intensity though, because I remember something that stuck in my mind that you told me was, and you said it casually, the sky is blue. You're like, I must have an orchestra job by the time I'm 25, or basically my life is a failure.
I think that I was being somewhat facetious because that was one thing that my high school teacher, Mary, used to say. She was like, everyone in Julius Baker's studio had a job before they turned 25 or whatever. So I think I kind of just internalized that, and now that's my very arbitrary benchmark for my life. I don't know, I've kind of moved past that more. I think what it is really is just building on what I'm doing, if that makes sense. So if I did, let's say a free summer festival next year, then doing one the following year that's longer, or that's with, a professor that I really look up to, or blah, 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 blah. Also, one of my big goals right now is to start subbing somewhere, or to find an appropriately sized orchestra to start subbing with. So I guess it's kind of just I do want to always be building towards my main goals, because, I'm not getting any younger, so...
I was going to say, time's ticking, Will.
Yeah, I know, 19, very advanced age. I mean, I might as well be on death's door.
Okay, boomer. So this sounds like a more realistic goal now, versus, 25 is the number, and I have to do this giant, difficult thing, which I have no doubt that you will someday, but now it's progressive goals, just a little bit more than before.
Oh, yeah. No, well, I mean, ultimately, there's just a lot of stuff that you're not in control of, especially when you're auditioning. Yeah, I don't know, I still do kind of have that number in my head, where I think that what would be really cool is if I won something while I was getting, a master's degree, or maybe a little bit before. Because a lot of, my icons who, have been in the CMU Flute Studio, that was kind of their trajectory. So, I kind of just want to be like them, I guess.
So you're not going to take any auditions until masters?
Oh, probably, Mr. Almarza said probably junior year, senior year I'm going to start. Yeah. And I'm definitely if something opens up that's local and I know the excerpts, because I have to admit that's my one big project right now. Just kind of learning all of the standard flute excerpts, to a point where, I see them on the list and I'm I don't know what this is, or I'm scared of this, being able to feel confident in all of the standards, basically. That's kind of where my head's at. That, if there's a list that's like that, I might take it. I mean, because professional auditions, there's not really that much of a fee if you're local. So, yeah, I'd go for it.
Yeah, and I think half the audition is knowing the excerpts and having a strong opinion musically, but the other half is just getting used to being in an audition setting and handling your nerves and being able to do things cold as well versus a recital, which I prefer, where you have a little bit of time to warm up. So I think you should just, or my teacher's philosophy is, you should just audition on every corner. I think he said audition outside of McDonald's if you can. Like literally take every audition.
Oh yeah. And can I say, I do mock auditions all the time for like stuff that isn't even particularly serious. Like I'll be doing a recording session and I'll ask like one of my friends in the studio, like, hey, could I just play all this stuff from you cold? Because, you know, obviously with a recording, there's kind of this feeling of safety because if you make a mistake, you know, you can just go back, or if you make a musical choice that you don't like. But I think that it's good just to get in the practice of doing things once, because oftentimes you'll kind of surprise yourself, I think, in a positive way, especially, you know, if you're putting in a lot of work to these things, with how well you can do just, you know, having the one chance and really focusing on it and putting your mind to it.
Yeah, I find that I almost never have an accurate depiction in my head of what I actually sound like. So when I listen back to recording, it's never accurate. Either it's way worse or way better than I thought. Sometimes way better. So yeah, it's good to check in with reality sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also really hard as a flutist, because we have a lot of our sound literally reverberating in our bodies in a different way than it projects out into the hall. So it's really, really hard to tell what you objectively sound like. That's why I record myself a lot. And actually, if possible, I try to record myself with this, like, I think, like, 50-buck microphone that I have sitting back here somewhere. Because, you know, it's like if you look in a mirror at a fun house, you can't really learn how to, like, fix your appearance if there's something wrong with it. You know, like, if you look at your nose in a funhouse mirror, it's going to appear very distorted. And the same thing happens when it's a bad recording device. You know, if you're recording yourself on a bad recording device, you're going to get a lot of ideas about your playing that aren't quite accurate. But if you have a higher quality recording device, then you're kind of more genuinely hearing, what do I actually sound like to other people? And how can I modify what I'm doing to create something a little bit more cohesive? Yeah.
Yeah, it can change so much based on your recording setup, and it can change based on what room you're in, obviously. And one thing that I like since coming to my master's program is the practice rooms are just nicer than the ones in New York. So in New York, it was very flat. I always felt like it sounded bad because the sound just died in the room. But here, I will go in the more acoustic practice rooms just for, it makes it more fun to play. And then even practicing now, like I will practice in the bathroom or something like that. That's just like super echoey. If I'm just like, this isn't fun and it's flat in my apartment, you know?
Yeah. Can I say space does have a lot to do with it? I remember I was once taking a lesson, and this was very random, with this lady who used to be principal flute of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, Emily Scotta. And the first thing that she did when she came into the room that the lesson was in was she rearranged the furniture. And originally I didn't quite understand, but she said, look, the energy of the space is going to dictate the energy of how you practice. That's why at CMU, there are 2 buildings with practice rooms. One, it's kind of small. It feels very condensed. Every room has a big piano in it. So you're like kind of like in this like little shoebox of area. Mm-hmm. And then the other, there are only like 3 or 4 practice rooms in there, but they're big classrooms. You know, there's nice open space to be in. They have full windows, and the view, it's out looking on Shenley Park. And I noticed that when I'm in one of those classrooms, I always feel kind of much more inspired. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm able to focus more on what I'm actually doing.
Wait, how did she rearrange the furniture?
Yeah. Rearrange the furniture. If I remember, she thought that there were like too many chairs in there, or too many stands. I think that she moved some stuff into the hallway because she was like, this space is not conducive to what I'm trying to do. I think that she was kind of like a bit mystical. I don't know. You know, there's some interesting things about her background, but she has a really beautiful recording, I think, of Schubert variations. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. If you walk into your practice room and it just is depressing and there's no window, there's no point making it feel like you're in jail when you're trying to get creative work done. And it makes me think about other things we could be doing as musicians to manage our attitude and our mood. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, what are some things that you do to keep the hard parts of practicing more tolerable, just day to day?
I mean, a lot of people kind of talk about this thing. I think that definitely with like our generation, it's caught on, you know, kind of like soft launching a practice session. Like you turn on a YouTube video and then start doing your warm-ups. Okay. And then suddenly by the time that you're done with your warm-ups, and you're on to solo repertoire, you're like, oh, like I'm ready to like do this and be fully present with this. I find another thing that really helps keeping me grounded is if there's like a piano part on YouTube to one of the pieces that I'm playing, going through with that feels like a very different experience. It's way more motivating because, can I say, playing something, most of what we play as flutist is not true solo repertoire. Most of it's either with the piano or with a full orchestra and we're the soloist, or if it's excerpts, it's us as a member of the section. We're missing so much context with every single piece of repertoire that we play, basically. So I find that, getting into that other half or that other piece of it really grounds me and helps me stay present in my practicing. Another thing is recording myself. I find that that's another thing. Because it's almost kind of like a little dopamine hit when you, record yourself and then press play, even if you don't love how you sound, because you can make very tangible improvements very quickly. You can kind of hear things that, it's harder to hear when it's just like resonating in your head.
Yeah.
And then if you do something really lovely and you didn't realize that, it was that nice in the moment, you're like, oh, wow, that's something musical I did. And, I'll mark it in to make sure that I keep it because I liked it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people don't think of recording themselves as a dopamine hit. It's more like a slap in the face.
No, I don't know. I guess the thing about it is, even if it's not great, I know that it's a tool that's going to help me get better. And if it is something that I'm really proud and really happy with, I can say, yeah, this is the kind of player I am, where, my whatever aspect I'm happy with, whether it's like, oh, I think that this is very technically secure, or I really like my sound on XY notes. It's kind of just something positive that I can ground myself in. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been recording myself a lot more recently, and it's been helpful. You're right, you can notice things that are wrong immediately, and you've played it 50 times without recording it, and it's like, how did this get past me, almost? But then it's also been helping me as teaching experience, because I just pretend like the recording is not me. What if this were a student? And then I talk out loud, think, okay, pretty good. This part sounded like you were compressing the rhythm. Make sure it's really even. And then over here, you were doing da-da-da-da-da. And for some reason, that having to put it in words like that works better than just, oh, okay, I hear what's wrong. I'm sure I'll just do it better next time. Or like, you have to spell these things out. Your brain is kind of stupid sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, especially where, it's so bimodal practicing, because you have to go into the mode of, oh, I'm playing right now, I'm performing, but then also I'm refining, I'm being like a critic almost. So it's hard to switch back and forth so many times, which is why I think that a lot of studies have been done on this, that typically you can really only practice productively for about 4 hours, and that anything after the 4-hour mark tends to stop sticking, because it's very mentally demanding to practice in a genuine way. I can kind of tell when I'm in one of those practice sessions where I'm like exactly in it. What I think I tend to default to is I tend to kind of just like playing a little bit more, which is useful, playing through whole pieces, because that is a very good way to check, is this secure? Also, even playing something live in front of someone that isn't quite secure yet, it's going to immediately expose to you what parts of the piece are not fully there that you thought were there. Because in performance, you're just going to do stuff that you would not do in a practice session, in terms of finger slips, in terms of breathing, not working as well. So, just figuring out little ways to support yourself and make sure that what you're going to do is what you want to do.
Yeah, I've heard the 4-hour thing, but it's not 4 hours in a row. Ideally, what I've read is an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, you can focus straight. But then ideally 1 hour individual chunks, and you do 4 of them throughout the day. But yeah, if you're doing more than 4 hours, probably your brain's not retaining a ton of that unless you're just a super genius outlier. But then, yeah, I've definitely seen, before my recital that was in the winter, I started running through the whole program about maybe a week or two before, going through the whole thing. All sorts of problems came up that I had never even realized. Like, I thought this part was secure, or I've been planning for a certain intonation here, but actually I've been playing for half an hour, so now I'm sharp. Just things like that. And there's all the things that we practice. Like you mentioned, you tend to just start playing things through as your kind of brain turned off default mode. I mean, there's something to that, like especially on an instrument like piccolo, where you're just trying to keep your chops up, or work on your endurance or stamina and all that. But I think if you know exactly what your objective is for what you're doing, there's like, I'm going to work on this measure for this practice session, and I'm going to make it perfect. That's much better than I'm just gonna go in there and kind of whatever happens, happens. Although it's all time on the instrument.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be said that nothing is a waste.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of it, it doesn't really matter how you get there. It just matters that you do, Whether I drive to Boston or fly to Boston or take the train or walk or hitchhike, I mean, it's all going to get me there. It's just a matter of time. So I agree that it's definitely good to find ways to make your practice more efficient. But this is kind of just me generally. I'm definitely a more results-oriented person than a process-oriented person. Just especially because of something like this, where when I can say, oh, this excerpt, I know that I could do this in front of X amount of people and I would not be worried about missing anything. I know that, the skeleton is good and all I have to do is just execute it musically. That's a totally different headspace for me than, ooh, there's this one bar I'm a little frightened. Or, oh, this one breath, I don't know if I'm going to make it. So a lot of times actually turning your brain off can be kind of good for stuff like that. I find. Obviously, if you're turning your brain off and you're trying it over and over again, it's not working. I mean, definition of insanity, Einstein, blah, blah. You should probably, turn your brain back on. But, sometimes I find genuinely that just doing something dumbly, that one awful run in classical symphony? All I literally had to do is I think I put on a YouTube video and 30 times, I said, I'm going to do this 30 times, and I'm literally going to wait on every note until I feel ready to transition to the next one and it feels secure. And now I can do it probably a good 75% of the time.
Yeah,
not enough
nice.
yet, but I have another week before I'm playing it, so we're all good.
I conquered that run of classical symphony this year, and I thought I could not play it. I was like, I'm never taking an audition with this on it. Turns out most of them have classical symphony on the list, so I wasn't screwed. Yeah.
Well, can I tell you, harmonics have been saving my life lately. For example, at National Symphony Orchestra, I was playing Mendelssohn Concerto, and there was an awful trill. I think it was high G sharp to high A sharp. And I was like, oh my god, how am I going to do this? But I realized, before it was a normal trill, I think it was G to A flat, I can just use the harmonic fingering and maintain what I'm doing my lips. And when I listened to the recording after the fact, it sounded exactly the same.
Yeah.
Classical symphony, harmonics have also been saving my life. That one bit where it's F sharp, A, B, A, F sharp, D. Yeah. Instead of doing the F sharp D, I just do B, G, which is so much easier. It's just so much better.
Yeah, sometimes we're working too hard and we need to work smarter. A lot of the flute is just, how good are you at solving problems? Don't do something 50 times that's not working and then think that it's going to magically work out when you need to do it under pressure and you have more adrenaline in your body. For Firebird, I started doing harmonics on it. I don't think you can tell on the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it's so much easier.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fast. And, can I say, I think that this might be something that Mr. Foreign and Mr. Omarza have in common, because I've heard something very, very similar for him, where what he said is that it's about being able to execute consistently. Because what I used to do, I really started only using thumb B flat super consistently this year, because I don't think that it was Mary who gave this to me. I think that it was actually my first teacher ever, who, that's a whole nother story. But one of her things is, I think that she was very against the false fingerings of any kind, even when they weren't really false. So for example, Mendelssohn Scherzo, I wasn't doing it with thumb B flat down, and I was able to do it, and I was able to execute it. But then, this year I got told when I was playing it, he was like, I couldn't really hear that you were doing the B flat, but in an audition, you're going to be nervous. Just try the thumb B flat and do it. And I realized, wow, this is just so much less technical stuff. There's so many less places for this to go wrong now.
Mm-hmm. Was that because you were stubborn before, or you just were used to your habit?
I think something that happened was, this is what Mr. Omarza told me that happened. Marcel Moyes saw a lot of American flutists using thumb B flat. And what he said to them was, oh, you should also know how to do the normal B flat, not the A sharp key, the one that's on F. And what people interpreted that as is no alternate B flat, that you have to do this for everything.
You have to be pure and natural. It's almost
kind of this misunderstanding of what Moyes said that led to this kind of school arising. Because he said that in Europe, this never caught on, this kind of thing. But I realize now alternate fingerings, if it's going to make a good sound, And if it's going to be more consistent and make our lives easier, of course we use them. We use them.
Yeah. And this reminds me of one of my big pet peeves is people who think things need to be natural to be good for you. Like, I'm a big fan of artificial sweeteners and protein bars and things like that, yes, they were processed in a lab, but it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. And I'll be like, well, it's more natural if you eat your food raw than if you cook it. Are you going to, like, start going raw vegan? And then they don't like that argument. But I feel like it's the same thing. Like, we don't need to be natural. We need to be intelligent.
Yeah, no, that is very true. Because, people, I think there's kind of like a pattern of thinking behind that there, I think, where it's this idea that because it comes from this particular source, that it's going to be good. But anything has the possibility for anything. Like, nature can give us, daisies and sunshine, but it can also give us coronavirus and the Black Death and all other, horrific things. So it's the same thing. The natural fingerings are not always going to give you a beautiful sound.
They're not more pure and more sacred.
Yeah. No, like C sharp, for example. C sharp, natural C sharp.
Not my friend.
Sometimes you want to put an extra finger or two down to get that pitch down. Or whatchamacallit, E, when you're transitioning from A to E, putting down that second control finger, it's just going to help the intonation.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's almost like kind of dogmatic in some ways, right? Where you say, oh, well, these are the fingerings that, are state mandated, and anything outside of that.
This is state mandated
this
fingerings,
is not, this is not like a fascist thing. This is not an authoritarian thing. There's no fingering maven who's going to tell you what's allowed and what's not allowed. If anything, those people, they're going to be listening to you, and they're not even going to see your fingers. I mean, especially if you're talking about something like classical symphony. So, yeah, there you go.
Plus, I fully agree. Plus, we were talking about before this call that some people have flute face, and so it's not so lovely to look at them. But I think if you can do the smize, the smiling with your eyes, people won't even be looking at your fingers.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, Pau does this very well, and I'm trying to think about some other people who I think have like a great smize. James Galway.
Oh yeah.
James Galway, when he's playing, he always is like very engaging to be looking at visually. I have to admit, when I perform, especially because, embouchure, I feel like everything in my face just kind of like gets like pulled forward in this interesting way. Also, I do a lot with my eyebrows when I play.
Oh, I used to do that so much that I was on a Zoom trial lesson with Carol Winsense, and she was like, you need to stop moving your eyebrows. I don't remember. She said my eyebrows were very distracting.
Yeah. I mean, there is a good reason for it in some ways, though, right? Because if you're putting your eyebrows up, you're kind of lifting your palate. So it's going to give you a bigger sound. But you could also just, lift your palate without doing all that. I don't know. It's fun.
Yeah.
Whatever works. I mean, at the end of the day, to go back to that idea of if it gets you where you need to be, then I'm good with it. Like, if you need to lift your eyebrows to get that beautiful resonant sound, then more power to you. This is a very individual journey.
Yes.
You're going to be the only musician in your life who gets to decide what's going to get you where you need to be. So as long as you figure it out for you, you can do all the weird stuff. I don't even care.
Yeah.
If you need to spin on your head to be able to, hit classical symphony consistently, then beautiful. I love that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then once you have the job, all the weird things you do can become dogma that you enforce upon your students, and you grade them, so they have to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is definitely a very valid school of teaching that, exists, where everyone has, their own quirks. I think, and some people see that they're quirks, and some people don't. And yeah, that's beautiful.
And you're not allowed to hit your students anymore.
You're not allowed. Were there any flute teachers in the past who were actually doing all of that?
Like hitting people?
Yes. I've never heard of this.
I've heard rumors about Marcel Moïse. My high school teacher studied with him. I heard some rumors.
I believe it. That generation in some ways was really, really wild.
Yeah.
Not Jean-Pierre Rampal, though. I've never heard anyone say anything negative about Jean-Pierre Rampal.
He just seems like a big teddy bear.
Yeah, that's exactly what everyone said. Apparently he was very tall, and he was just like this very sweet guy. And I think that shows in his playing as well, because still, to this day, my favorite rendition of the second movement of the Mozart G is him playing, I think, with the Vienna Philharmonic. And he just does all, he doesn't do the appoggiaturas in like any kind of affected way. He just plays it through, and it's beautiful. Yeah, I don't know. And also such a warm sound. I mean, I have to admit, I used to be like a really, really big fan of like Julius Baker, Jean-Pierre Rampal, where I was like, oh, like they're just the goats for all time. Now I just listen to a lot of Jeannie Baxtresser because I think that she has a lot of those kind of elements of playing, but she was using better recording devices. And she also just kind of has like this je ne sais quoi to her playing that I don't even know how to put it, but like she's just always doing like these fun things that like I would never think of, but like I hear her do it and it's like, wow, this is someone who's so empowered in her own artistry. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so you're 19, right?
Yes.
So I wonder how much of your own artistic expression and opinions are still being developed by all the things that you're listening to. When will your music opinions be fully baked in? Like, this is the way I do it.
Hopefully never. I mean, if I learn a better way, I learn a better way, right? Yeah. I mean, I obviously, what I would say is, I never, I don't do this thing that, I've seen, like, sometimes other people do, where, like, they're really into one thing for a bit, and then suddenly they go the complete opposite direction. Where they're like, oh, I love this person's playing, and you talk to them a year later, and they're like, oh, like, I would never listen to their recordings, like, that's not something I would do anymore. Like, I still appreciate 100%. Like, I still think that Julius Baker's playing is, well, I mean, obviously it's technically flawless. I mean, listen to him play Voliere. Like, I have never heard someone be able to play it with that much precision, but at the same time having like this totally blitz tempo. You know what I mean? And Jean-Pierre Rampal, I still think that lyrically, probably he's one of the strongest flutists because he's really able to mimic a human voice, I think. But that doesn't mean they're just not my favorite anymore. Like, they're not like, if I see them next to Jeannie Baxtresser's name, I'm probably going to listen to Miss Baxtresser's recording. But who knows? This could all change. And obviously, Miss Baxtresser hasn't recorded every single piece of music that has been played. So, I also like Eubene Kim a lot, which I know is like a very basic thing to say. I think that everyone likes Eubene Kim's playing. But especially his second movement of the Jolivet at Concours de Genève, I'm like, wow. I really want to revisit the Jolivet Concerto now because I was never able to get that second movement quite where I wanted it to be. But like listening to him, it's very motivating. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many wonderful flutists. I mean, I feel like constantly, especially when you go listen to, different symphony orchestras, you hear how many flutists aren't necessarily, like quote unquote world famous soloists, but you hear they're playing and it's incredible and they sound wonderful in the orchestra. So, there's so much good stuff out there, really.
Yeah, it seems like you're collecting new favorites instead of having to constantly compare the new one with the old one in a negative light.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I don't know, I think, with some people it's like they need to be very baked into like one kind of thing. I mean, but like once again, to go back to like that utilitarian thing, I feel like a broken record. If it works, it works. If it gets you to that level of artistry that, is compelling to, all of these people who are listening to you, then ultimately I'm not really going to judge too much like how you got there or, what school of playing you are or
Yeah. I think our brains just like certainty. So wouldn't it be nice to say, I have all my opinions done about what is good in music and what is not. So then I don't have to think too hard and I can teach it to other people more easily as well. But, and then that thing you said about you're not really a serial obsessive where you go from thing to thing. Your intensity is very, I think you said single-minded before. And then you also said that you're results-oriented, not the process. But that sounds kind of really stressful. It's like, it has results, obviously, but do you ever get drained by just the process? And is it true you don't love the process?
No, it's not that I don't like the process. It's just I don't necessarily value the process above the results.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I enjoy playing greatly. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be playing, especially when it's repertoire that I really, really like. But, let's say, that there's this excerpt that, like, I'm not a fan of, but there's a summer festival that I want to apply to. I'm learning the excerpt. I don't care if I have to kick and scream and shout. I need to go for it so that I can build on what I'm already doing, right? I feel like in some ways being like super into process in my mind, and maybe this is like my scarcity mindset, who knows, call me out. I mean, obviously I love playing and I love practicing, and it's very important to me. But I think, especially, when you're not in a place where your career is like super secure yet, where, you have a full-time job or you have, a full calendar of gigs and whatever you're doing, I think you do kind of need to be somewhat driven towards the goal so that you can make, this whole being a classical musician thing sustainable for yourself. I'm really big on kind of building an environment that I can be creative in, but it's not going to take away from my quality of life, right? So right now, because, we're in school, that's a very good place, I think, for us to be very results minded, because we're not yet in a place where it's like life and death or anywhere close. It's kind of like we just get to be super driven towards this particular path so that we can create stability for ourselves in the future. I don't know, maybe I have scarcity mindset, but, I don't think it's like not necessarily negative. I don't know. Yeah.
My hot take is that successful people have some toxic things going on in their head, but unfortunately, it's the other side of success. Like, I'm sure that when you achieve something, you are immediately on to the next thing. We always move the goalpost, and it's never good enough, but that's the thing that gets results as well.
Having the process as the top priority for me doesn't mean that I love music any less. Doesn't mean that I love artistry any less. I guess it just means that I want to be that kind of person, where I have that level of direction and that level of commitment to what I'm doing and going there. Yeah.
Yeah, you love music enough that you want to make sure you can do it for a living, which means you have to be excellent at it.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is also, and this is something where I'm not going to say that it makes me super different to other people, but I know that it's not as common. I listen to classical music basically all the time. Basically from the time that I get up in the morning to the time that I go to bed at night. And I don't know, my favorite composers, I love Jean-Philippe Rameau. I think that all of his operas are masterpieces, basically. Jean-Baptiste Lully. I love French Baroque music, which is, kind of very niche, especially here in the States, but it's like one of my favorite things. I love ballets, all eras. Tchaikovsky, Bizet as well, especially his operas. I really love works written, I think, for the stage, because there's a lot of intention behind them from the composer, in the sense that they're there to tell a very specific story or illustrate specific characters. So they put a lot of thought in, how do I bring this to life? How do I give this character of vibrancy? That I really resonate with, I think. Yeah, and then, also the Stravinsky ballets are all masterpieces. I love Hindemith as well. I think that he's so smart and creative. Yeah, and I'm kind of always listening to, different stuff and looking for new stuff to get into. So I think that that's also a big part of where I kind of derive the joy of music making from. And funnily enough, most of the stuff that I listen to is not flute repertoire in my free time. Most of it is orchestral repertoire, or actually a lot of vocal music as well. So yeah, I don't know, I think that I kind of have like a boundaried approach to music, if that makes sense, where I say, okay, this is a space where I'm perfecting my craft, where I'm getting what I need to get together so that I can go out there and achieve my goals professionally. And then this is the part where I kind of just enjoy. Like, even sometimes I'll just like casually arrange music that I love, and I'll put like a flute part on it because I'm just like, oh wow, like I just think that this is fabulous. Like, there's one entree from Le Fête des Bêtes, which is one of my favorite Rameau operas. By the way, sorry for the botched pronunciation.
Way better than I can do, so you're doing great.
But, it's the entry of Terpsichore, the muse of dance. And the music just has this incredible bouncy quality. The phrases are very clear. He plays with rhythm in this way that you wouldn't expect, where you have a 9-bar phrase instead of a 7-bar phrase. And yeah, that's one thing that I also just love in music, this kind of pushing and pulling and playing with the expectations, I think that that's something that's so magical as well. I think that that's why I don't tend to listen to like a ton of Mozart. Not because it's formulaic, I mean, it's incredible, but just because, the classical era especially, it's very about having prescribed structures, and I kind of like the stuff where people can experiment and play a little bit more with that. Yeah, I don't know. So I do trust and believe, I do genuinely love classical music. I do think that there's so much that's meaningful about it. I guess I just think that it's almost like in the practice room I was saying earlier, you need to be able to oscillate between performer and critic. I think that as someone who is, in the arts, you need to be able to oscillate between worker bee, achieving what you need to achieve professionally, and then, a savant or someone who appreciates them in a genuine emotional way. Yeah.
No, I think that's very wise that if you, like you said, if you neglect the part of music that is for you, that's for fun, and also that's just appreciating instead of constantly critiquing, you will burn yourself out on music. Because let's say you win your dream job at 25. You may be around for 75 more years and hopefully not working for the whole time, but it's a long game that we're playing here to do everything correctly.
Yeah. And I have to admit, one of the other reasons that I kind of want my career to, get into that stable place is that, I also have other interests. Like, for example, I would love to do, I don't know, maybe like a master's degree in like an academic subject or something like that. Because I think that writing nonfiction would be fascinating. Not something, like STEM. I'm not a mathematician. But, more something like philosophy or religion, where, we're kind of dealing with stuff that's less tangible. And I think not like less accessible per se, but something that's like a little bit higher minded, right? Because what we're doing as classical musicians, everyone says, oh, music is a language, but what is it saying? Because it's not like an F has a meaning. It's not like, when I say tree, you can visualize a tree and you know exactly what that is. And you could probably point out that object, if we were to go walking around. But what does a phrase mean? We're dealing almost with this very metaphorical language that is unable to express anything literal unless there's a very specific intention behind expressing something literal, which once again, why I love the opera and the ballet music. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of engaging with more of that stuff that has that kind of same quality of being ineffable, of being higher than, kind of everyday existence, I think that goes very, very hand in hand. Because, especially if you look at someone like Rameau, to bring up my, one of my favorite composers again, when he was collaborating with people on his librettos, he collaborated with Voltaire. He, and a lot of the other composers like Boesset, he was with Descartes and they were talking about stuff together. Lully was collaborating with Molière when he wrote the incidental music to La Bourgeois Gentilhomme. There used to be kind of this tradition of classical music being very closely related with literature, with philosophy, with religion, that I think we basically completely lost in like maybe the last century. Because, Wagner was there, Nietzsche was there as well. Most people don't know he was also a composer of music.
Oh, I did not know that.
Successful. But, you can actually find recordings of his stuff that, people have put out there.
I think you're right that a musician cannot just be a technician of their instrument. It's going to be so boring. And I'm sure you've heard recordings of people who are technically excellent, but there's just no sense of phrase. And you mentioned listening to a lot of music. There's been studies on this that if you give your brain a model like that subconsciously, it does soak in, and then you have a template when you see a new piece of music that's going to be more intuitive and natural sounding and informed from all the recordings that you've listened to. But I wanted to ask, I'm really interested to hear that you want to do something academic, possibly, because I think we get in this pattern as musicians where our identity is sort of so intertwined with the instrument that we play that it's almost dangerous for us when we start facing rejections and all that, because it's not just like the thing that I do, it's me as a person. But it sounds like you have a lot more to your identity than just Will, the flute player, even though that's like obviously a giant part. So how do you part?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I can kind of like talk about different elements of me. I mean, I'm a Buddhist, practicing Jodo Shinshu. I mean, at this point, I haven't been doing it for very long, but I've been doing Buddhist practices, specifically Zen, with my aunt for like a while now. I would highly recommend anyone who wants an introduction to Buddhism, specifically Mahayana Buddhism, read the Heart Sutra, because it's really, that's probably one of the religions, right, where we're thinking about what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of consciousness, of, we're having an experience, and for X amount of years before we existed, there was no experience to be had. How do we explain that? There are kind of just like a million questions that are kind of in the background just to being alive. So I think that finding a way to interact with that is super important. And then another thing that I love is that, now I go to New York Buddhist Church, which is on 103rd and Riverside, I think. I kind of have a community as well of people who are like-minded in that sense, in terms of they want to talk about, being alive and death, actually. Just a service I went to this weekend. It was a memorial service. And I actually found it very, very hard to sit through because they listed off all the people in the community. I didn't know any of them, I don't think, who passed in the recent year. And, just that kind of fostered like this compassion in my heart, because I was like, wow, there are all these people who are having these cataclysmic life events where they have to completely shift around the way that their lives work and, who they spend time with. And, even maybe the place that they live in, because someone left, and then that person also probably they had emotional connection with. So I think that cultivating some sense of humanity definitely is important as a classical musician, because I do think that it also kind of gives you more breath to like put into your music. All that to say, basically, I think that having some kind of spirituality that informs what you think that this life is about beyond, all these kind of material things in some way that, we're chasing is very important. Classical musicians like, oh, you're in such a creative field. And I mean, it definitely is a type of creativity. But on the other hand, like, we literally have, what we're supposed to be doing, like, handed to us. Like, it's almost like reading, in a way, or reading aloud, where, we take these notes and then we transfer them into literal physical sound. So we're taking something that's kind of ineffable, intangible, and bringing it into a tangible space where you can literally hear it.
I've had people, when they hear that I'm a musician, they're like, oh, do you want to compose something? Don't you want to be a composer? I'm like, no, I want someone else to write it for me, and I'll just follow the instructions. That's what I want to do.
And I have to admit, I am kind of interested in composing, mainly just because I do feel like there is that opposite end of creativity, where it's almost like, to get into that concept of like yin and yang, right? Yang is active energy, and yin is kind of this passive energy. And I feel like in some ways performing, it is somewhat of a passive thing, because, you're being observed. You're not the observer, you're the one being observed. You're also, there's kind of this idea of staying composed, right? Where necessarily when you're writing something or when you're alone, you can get very impassioned and frenzied. But if you lose your composure in a performance, that's actually a huge issue. In fact, that's kind of one of the struggles, right? Because a lot of the performers who, they're super dynamic with their body language and what they're doing, sometimes, the tone might get a little bit less controlled or something like that, as opposed to someone who, they're very stoic, and, they're kind of like at rest. Once again, rest versus action, yin versus yang. So I think that I definitely need something. I don't quite know exactly yet what, that's going to draw more on that active energy where I'm like conceptualizing a thing and then bringing it into the world, rather than being the one who turns the concept into the physical thing. I think that having all of those different areas as something that I do kind of would just mean that I'm like fully liberated as a creative being, where I can kind of just say, well, today I feel more receptive, today I feel more active, today I feel more X, today I feel more Y, just to give me some flexibility in that. Also, I think that personal relationships are so important. Me as, a friend or a family member, that's just as important as, the musician stuff or the spiritual stuff or the creative stuff. Because, at the end of the day, humans, we are a social species. Back in the day, if we got ostracized by our tribe, we would, probably have to fend for ourselves, and either we'd be very lonely for a long time, or, we just wouldn't be able to do it and, like, get mauled by some bear.
Yeah. I mean, this is why shame exists, and it's why it's painful. Because if you do something stupid and selfish and you get ousted by your tribe, you might die. So you better feel some pain that makes you behave.
Yeah. And that's funny, right? Because shame, that's an emotion that we often feel, when we feel like someone is, like, saying no to us, or, like, we didn't get something. But I doubt that anyone in our studios would ever get mad at anyone else for not getting something. So
no,
it's
we're
so
way harder on ourselves than we would be on anyone else, and way less forgiving.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the psychologists can attest that. Everyone can attest to that. Yeah, I mean, we just do hold ourselves to a different standard. But yeah, I think I definitely agree kind of with what you're saying, where I think that having a multifaceted identity is really important, because I think also this is what allows me to be kind of results-oriented, right? If I was a musician, and that's all that I was, and that's all my identity was, and I was just results-oriented as well, and not process-oriented, I would have to say, oh, well, the purpose of my life is doing X, Y, Z, so if I don't get it, with ease, that's like a huge issue for me. But now, even I can keep that results-oriented aspect where it's like, if I encounter a setback, I can lean into other stuff in my life, like my interpersonal relationships, or like my spirituality, or like my creativity, or like these other aspects as well. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's this trend in the culture lately where everyone wants you to be very simple. I think it has to do a lot with having a brand. And I do have to admit, there's a lot of talk now about how classical musicians need to develop a brand in the 21st century. But I think about that idea of, having a brand, right? And what that comes from. That comes from objects. When we talk about a brand, typically they're literally selling in objects. I'm not an object. I'm a little bit more complex than that, and everyone is. So I don't think that we should be reducing ourselves to objects to make ourselves marketable, or to have this very shiny kind of veneer up. I think that we need to be honest with ourselves and say that we're never going to only be one thing. In the same way that we're never going to only feel one emotion, we're never going to have only one opinion. We're always kind of in this state of flux and impermanence, actually, to tie it back to my spirituality. So we need to kind of, I think, accept that. And it is hard to do because, especially in other fields, they're so different in the sense that, I think it's not as necessary in some other professions to have other areas of your life to rely on outside of the profession, because there isn't necessarily as much rejection that's going on. There isn't as much kind of, disappointment going on. Because it's funny, even the musicians, every musician I know, regardless of how incredible of a player they are, or how incredible of a player they've been in the past, has faced significant, opportunities that they haven't gotten, no matter the level. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that is kind of something special that I think we musicians have to deal with a lot, where we have to think of how do we handle that in terms of, when people say no. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what's cool about musicians. There's that sort of built-in camaraderie that we've all been rejected, but we're all still here. So there's something a little broken in our brain where it doesn't bother us and we're allowed to keep going. And then I think you mentioned having relationships is really important and helps you with that rejection as well. And this was one thing I like about you is we ran into each other on the audition circuit, but you were very supportive of everyone there. And I think that's so nice because there's this feeling that for you to win, someone else has to lose. And there's this great quote: "Few men have the strength of character to rejoice in a friend's success without a touch of envy," which I think is kind of true, but we have to fight against that, because if you're fighting the audition and you're also fighting everyone else there, your life just becomes just negative and stressful all over.
Oh yeah, and small, very isolating. Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that I think that there are a couple issues with that type of thinking that you laid out, this zero-sum game kind of thing. First of all, no hires exist. No one could win.
Yeah.
So, to act
it's
like
not
we're
making
in
me feel better.
competition. Yeah, no, exactly. So to act like we're in competition with each other, there's only one spot. There might be no spots.
Yeah, there you go.
We're not in control of that, right?
Also not
so
helpful.
I think the way that you kind of treat that is that whatever is going on, juries or audition panels from people who have told me what being an audition panel is like. Obviously, I haven't sat on any panels yet. They're not thinking about Susie Q who went before you when they're listening to your audition. They're thinking about your audition. So show them what you have. It's not about other people. Everyone has their own path. And I do think that there is kind of this narrative that some people love to propagate, which does lead to this type of thinking with this whole idea of scarcity. But I mean, not to be like that, but I think, I'm a bit of an audition forum stalker. There have been 20, 25 auditions this year. So if that keeps up every year, then logically, in 4 years from now, there are probably going to be 100 people with jobs who didn't have them before.
Mm-hmm.
So there are spots, there are opportunities. I think that what it is about is just not saying no to yourself before other people say no to you. And then also positioning yourself to be in a way that when opportunity comes, you're ready to capitalize on it. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
You're so wise for 19. It's kind of crazy.
Just read the Heart Sutra and, I don't know, listen. That's one other thing. What I love about the CMU Flute Studio is we've had some of the flute icons come in lately. Leon Bizey just came in, Sharon Sparrow, Amal Gokenauer, who's a piccolo at Baltimore, all people who have been in major symphony orchestras and, gone on to have big careers. And I think really, and then even, we met at Consummate Flutist, right? Where Mark Sparks was there, and Mr. Almarza, and Soo Kyung, and, so many, Lorna McGee, how could I forget?
Yeah.
So many great, top-notch professionals who we get to hear them talk for literally hours and hours and hours. I really, really try to retain the stuff that they're saying and fully absorb it. Because they're the ones who have the hindsight to be able to see what we should be keeping in our mindset and what's okay to discard, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, especially talking about someone like Sharon Sparrow, like, she has that stuff on lock. Like, she literally wrote the book on the mindset to have and the preparation to have. So yeah, it's incredible.
I think you're doing everything right at the moment, because you're being very serious about this main goal, but not so serious that you are risking ruining it for yourself. And you're doing that by having relationships and having other philosophies in your life and other parts of you besides that flute identity. And then there's these other parts of yourself, other interests, and you're not saying, no, we're not doing that. We're doing the main thing. You're sort of just being open-minded to whatever. And then another thing I find is that we're sort of egotistical to think that we know exactly what's best for us and what's going to make us happy in the long run. And in reality, you just take one step forward and you say yes to opportunities, even things you think might be so awesome, and then you find out that you hate it. And that's just information, and that's just part of the process.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think about it as an experience that was similar to that, where I thought that I would love something, and then I ended up disliking it. I mean, I think in other areas of my life I've had this, where, things end up being disappointing. But I mean, that is kind of the nature of life in some ways, We live in the Saha world, back to the Buddhist theology, the world to be endured. So there's always going to be kind of stuff that we need to get through. I mean, literally every day we have to pick ourselves up and do what we need to do, or we're literally going to die. Because, you have to eat, you have to drink water. It's just an unnegotiable fact of life. You have to sleep. In this modern society, you have to eat money, or you could move to the woods and build a cabin and, hunt, but that's also
would be dead day one.
So, I think you should give yourself more credit. It's in our DNA. It comes much more naturally to us to live as, these hunter-gatherers than it does for that. You'd probably be missing some training. But I think if we got you some good guidebooks and, I don't know, a nice mentor, But
I only have my Sharon Sparrow book. It's not very helpful.
Yeah, I know. We'll get you, who would have, we could get you, who's that Australian, animal wrangler?
You think I know who you're talking about. I can't remember the name.
What's his name? We can get his book, and you can learn, how to make friends with the alligators, and they'll do the hunting for you.
True.
And, we'll move you to the Everglades, and you can be, some swamp lady and play on your flute. And
that
I don't know,
sounds
people
great.
will, take photos of you, and write books, and be like, ooh, the elegant swamp lady.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
You're really selling it, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm really glad for the
Yeah,
air
I know.
conditioning.
Unfortunately, neither of us are abandoning society yet. I have thought, I genuinely, when I get old, I might just become a monk. I'm not even gonna lie. That's a very common thing that's happened in history, that when people are approaching death, that they fully just get into their religious beliefs and their spirituality. I could totally see myself doing that.
Yeah.
Especially because the specific sect of Buddhism that I'm a part of, I mean, you have to get the training, obviously. But you don't have to make too many, lifestyle choices, differently, I don't think. For example, you don't have to become a vegetarian. And there's a long theological history of that. But this is a music podcast, not a theology podcast.
I want to ask you one other question on Buddhism. I know Buddhism has an interesting idea about suffering. That's kind of a very important part. Can you explain what that is? Kind of footnotes version.
I mean, what I would say is suffering is the common English translation of the word dukkha, which is used a lot. It's from Pali. What I would say, though, I think a better translation is dissatisfactory. Because suffering, that's very loaded, right? In my head, it's almost kind of Christian, the way that you're thinking of it there, where you're like, oh, well, life is suffering. It almost reminds me of this kind of vibe of the martyrs. But dukkha just means life is unsatisfactory in the sense that nothing in this life is going to fully satisfy you. Because think about, literally the most basic functions. Hunger. Even if we satisfy our hunger, even if we stuff ourselves, we're still going to get hungry again. Even if we drink water, we're going to get thirsty again. Even if we sleep, we'll get tired again. even if, we have a wonderful relationship with someone, if that relationship ends, that sucks. If you don't get something that you worked really hard for, that sucks.
Yeah, and you'll fall out of infatuation, and if you were never hungry or thirsty again, it'd be because you were dead. So you should be glad.
No, exactly. So kind of the nature of life is that we're never going to be able to be fully satisfied. So Buddhism is about how do we respond to that. And my sect, Jodo Shinshu, it's basically based on the teacher of this Japanese mystic who was in the medieval era, Shinran Shonin, where there's this whole sect of Buddhism called Pure Land. And basically, the sum up of it is that there's this guy named Amitabha Buddha, he's one of many Buddhas, and that after death, or during the moment of death, if you're mindful of him, you're going to reborn into a different place where essentially it's easier to kind of achieve that enlightenment that people talk about. Where, you kind of realize that we can't hustle our way to enlightenment. We can't hustle our way out of the dissatisfactory nature of the world, if that makes sense. What we have to do actually is rely on others and on other beings and on our own compassion and compassion to be found in the world at large, and say, okay, I'm going to be mindful of this figure who has made this vow to create a space for me to achieve this. I'm going to trust in them. And then after I achieve my own enlightenment, I'm going to help other beings get there as well. That's part of, this whole idea in Mahayana Buddhism about the Bodhisattva, which is Buddhists who have achieved enlightenment could hypothetically escape the cycle of death and rebirth, but choose not to, so that they can help other living beings. So all of this to say that when it comes to the Buddhist idea of suffering, it's more about the end of suffering than it's about the suffering itself. How do we end suffering? And, funnily enough, I think that that's probably one of the best ways to find meaning in this life. I think that a lot of what we hear now is it's all about, the pursuit of happiness. I mean, even to go back to, the founding fathers or whatever. It's all about kind of chasing these momentary hits of joy. But you have to remember, joy, just like sadness, is a chemical reaction. And joy can't fill you up forever. The joy will end eventually. Even if you're joyful from this moment until death, at death, that joy ends. So what's going to be something that brings sustainable, not satisfaction per se, because I don't want to, get that idea muddled, but what's going to give you meaning on a consistent basis? And I think that finding ways to alleviate suffering for other beings is one of the best perspectives to take. I think music is a beautiful way to do that. There are so many people who listening to music alleviates their suffering, regardless of the circumstance. Like, think about why people play music at funerals, especially, religious, devotional music. It's because it connects with you and it gives you comfort. It's almost like this spiritual presence that's kind of there, in a way. And I think also, even just when, living life, just thinking about, instead of how can I chase my personal joy, how can I alleviate the suffering of myself and others, I just think that it's a different mindset. Yeah.
I think that's a great way to get out of our heads in terms of the competitiveness of playing music and being a student and worrying about auditions and all that. If you reframe your music as a thing you want to be excellent at so that you can give it as a gift to the audience, it's so much less toxic, so much better.
Yeah. And, the thing about it is once again, it's something that's non-literal, so it can never be defined. So that's why we have to find our own meaning in it, because the meaning isn't going to be immediately apparent. So I think whether you view it as a gift or whether you view it as a medicine, as long as it's more to you than notes on a page or an accomplishment on a resume, that's what matters.
I think that's an awesome word of wisdom to end on. Will, thank you so much for doing the podcast with me.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, this has been great. Just getting to yap about music and spirituality and creativity and yeah.
And off camera we can have some more specific names and drama, but that's for Patreon or something.
I need to get off my Buddhism so that I can become a real gossip again. Yeah, exactly.
I know. I don't think Buddhism likes gossip, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the Buddha himself said, whatchamacallit, there's right speech and there's wrong speech, so I need to get back on my wrong speech grind. Yeah.
True. So you're headed to Orford now? What else is next for you?
Yes, I'm going to be headed to Orford next with the wonderful Monsieur Robert Langevin. Oh my god, I probably butchered his name. But whatever, me butchering French is like a theme of this podcast. But yeah,
the title.
It's going to be great. Me butchering French, my new podcast. Yeah, tune in, Karina Geist, my first guest. I don't know, I'm going to be off at that. Obviously, I mean, it's scary because literally the second I get back to school, it will be back to summer festival recordings and just learning repertoire and go, thinking about the future. Hopefully, like, there will be some sub-list auditions that come up because, yeah, like, let's go. Let's step into it. Yeah, but I don't know, just being a student and learning.
I'll be learning for the next 75 years if it goes that long.
The journey never ends.
It never ends, as the Buddha said, although he probably didn't say that. I can say whatever.
There is
no one's
an end.
fact-checking. There is an end. This is true. Well, thank you so much, Will.
Of course, yes. All right.
And good luck with everything.
Thank you for watching The Practice Room. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Also, contact me on Instagram or my website if you would like to be a guest or would like to suggest a guest. Links in the description. Thank you.